Well, now we're traveling due south, which is that way, towards the southeastern African nation of Mozambique. Wildlife biologist Ryan Long earned 2 graduate degrees in Idaho, a master's at the U of I and a doctorate at Idaho State, before joining a large collaborative research project at Princeton as a postdoc that led him to his current work on the spiral horned antelope, specifically the brushbeck species in the Gorongosa National Park. Did I get it? No worries. All right. As an assistant professor in the wildlife sciences in the College of Natural Resources, Ryan is an expert in studying the influence of body size on all aspects of large herbivore ecology. What he'll explain today, though, focuses on a tangent from the antelope work in Africa that reveals a special value of curiosity-driven science. Please welcome Ryan.
That's right, I got it. I'll just do that. All right, well, thanks everybody for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak at this event and to share a little bit about the work that I do internationally with you. So my research program revolves around the ecology of large mammals, and most of the projects in my lab right now are split pretty evenly between Western North America and Sub-Saharan Africa, the latter of which is why I'm here this evening. So I work in Gorongosa National Park, which is located in central Mozambique in southeastern Africa. Now for tonight, there's 2 key things you need to know about the park. The first is that most of the large carnivores were extirpated during a civil war that ended in the early 90s. And the second is that there's 2 broad habitats, the open floodplain habitat and forested savanna. And my graduate students and I have conducted a variety of different projects at Gorongosa over the last several years, including studies of crop raiding behavior by male elephants and how to prevent it, the behavioral consequences of tusklessness in female elephants, and relationships between body size and behavior of various species of spiral horned antelope. However, the story I want to share with you today actually has nothing directly to do with any of those projects. This story has to do with predator-prey interactions and the ecology of fear. So as you can see, direct effects of large carnivores on their prey are relatively conspicuous, and these kinds of predation events can also influence plant communities by reducing density of the herbivores that eat those plants. However, predators can also influence plant communities by altering the behavior of herbivores, and when that happens, it's known as a behaviorally mediated trophic cascade. Now, in the classic version of this type of cascade, herbivores avoid areas that they perceive to be risky, which often are also good foraging areas, and the plants benefit from the reduction in herbivory. Now, although these types of cascades have been amply demonstrated in some systems, evidence for their existence in large mammalian systems is limited and relatively controversial. And one of the reasons for that is that it's exceedingly difficult to experiment with large mammals in field settings, and as a result, a lot of the current evidence is considered to be equivocal. So one of the antelope species that we work with is the bushbuck, and this is an ideal candidate for testing some of these kinds of ideas. This diminutive little forest antelope is strongly dependent on woody cover to hide from predators, and it's almost never seen in the open. At Gorongosa, though, we've regularly observed bushbuck using that open floodplain habitat, perhaps due to a lack of predators. So the first step in determining whether we had a fear-driven trophic cascade was to experimentally reimpose fear and evaluate how bushbuck responded. So we did that by dividing our sample of GPS-collared bushbuck into treatment animals and control animals, and exposing treatment animals to predator sounds and scents, and control animals to white noise and saline. So there's 2 key results from that experiment. The first is that both floodplain and woodland bushbuck moved away from predator cues, but not from control cues. And the second is that only floodplain bushbuck significantly increased their use of woody cover following exposure to predator cues. So essentially, a risk caused them to start acting more like normal bushbuck again. So the second major component of a fear-driven cascade is that there needs to be some benefit to the herbivore of altering its behavior in the absence of predators. So we try to get at that by quantifying diet composition and quality by analyzing fecal samples and by using ultrasonography to quantify nutritional condition of bushbuck using these 2 different habitat types. So on the y-axis here, this figure, you've got percent of the diet, and then you've just got all the various plant species that bushbuck eat on the x-axis. And what you can see here clearly is that there's almost no overlap in the diets of floodplain and woodland bushbuck. Floodplain animals are eating one group of plant species, and woodland animals are using a completely different set of plants. So we use that information to go out and quantify 2 metrics of nutritional quality in all of those different plant species, digestible energy and digestible protein. And what we found is that the diets of floodplain bushbuck were significantly higher in both energy and protein content than the diets of woodland bushbuck. So in this next figure, you're going to see 2 different metrics of body condition. You've got body mass on the left side and body fat on the right side for floodplain and woodland bushbuck. And although there was a fair amount of variation among individuals in this analysis, the general pattern here is that floodplain bushbuck were larger bodied and had greater fat reserves than their woodland counterparts. So the third component of a fear-driven cascade involves downstream consequences to the plant community of this change in herbivore behavior. And a broader analysis we did of diet composition of all the various herbivore species that use the floodplain fortuitously revealed a single plant species that's eaten almost exclusively by bushbuck, Bergia mozambicensis. So we used that plant in an herbivore exclusion experiment where we went out and we tagged pairs of Bergia plants in the floodplain. We measured a variety of traits related to their productivity, and then we built these tiny little cages around one plant in each pair to evaluate whether herbivory by bushbuck was suppressing Bergia productivity. So the results of that experiment after only 18 days were striking. Plants that were protected from bushbuck herbivory had significantly more leaves and flowers, they attained greater heights, and they covered a greater area than plants that were exposed to bushbuck herbivory, suggesting that bushbuck were indeed suppressing productivity of this plant on the floodplain. So to summarize the key results of our study, all bushbuck in our first experiment avoided predator cues, but floodplain bushbuck exhibited a stronger response by increasing their use of woody cover. Those floodplain bushbuck also had significantly higher quality diets that resulted in them being in better condition. And finally, herbivory by bushbuck suppressed productivity of one of their primary forage plants on the floodplain. So our study provides some of the first experimental evidence of a behaviorally mediated trophic cascade in a large mammal system. And the 2 primary predators of bushbuck are leopards and wild dogs. And the extirpation of those species from Gorongosa has released bushbuck from the fear of predation, altering both bushbuck behavior and plant productivity. So why is it useful to understand these types of cascades? Well, a recent study of some of the world's largest carnivores suggested that most of those carnivores are declining. And so if what we've documented at Gorongosa is a general phenomenon, then you can imagine the magnitude of the effect that these declines are likely to have on ecosystems as more and more herbivores become fearless. So I want to acknowledge my co-authors on this project, especially Justine Atkins, who's one of the PhD students on the Antelope Project in general, and is the lead author of this paper, as well as the various field technicians and park personnel that made this study possible. And thanks to everybody for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Welcome.